everyone, welcome to Easy Explanation. So in today's video we'll be discussing about symbols in ER diagram. So what are the symbols that we use in order to draw ER diagram? So I'll be explaining each symbol in detail, giving an example, and after this we can start drawing the diagram. Okay, so in this video I'll covering only the symbols. So the first symbol is known as how to represent an entity. Okay, so entity is represented by a rectangle shape. Okay, an entity is represented by a rectangle shape. For example, if you got an entity, student entity, so this can be represented as like this, student. Second is attributes. So attribute is represented by a oval shape. Okay, so suppose if you have got an entity named student, so what are the attributes of this student? So the attributes can be ID, another attribute can be name. Okay, another attribute can be its roll number. So this is how entity and attributes are represented. Next one is how to represent a relationship. Third is how to represent a relationship. So a relationship is represented by a diamond shape. Okay, for example, if there are two entities called student and another entity called course, so the relationship can be represented as like this: a student enrolls in a course. Okay, next diagram, next component is line. So line is represented by a straight line. So actually this is the example of the line. It is used to connect two entities. It is used to connect relationship and entity. Okay, now these are the diagrams of the relationship and attributes. Now coming to the types of attribute. So again we have to represent the various types of attribute in different way. Okay, so these are the types of attributes. Okay, so first attribute is single value or simple attribute. So this simple or this single value attribute, it is actually represented by the simple oval shape. Okay, next comes the multi-valued attribute. Okay, multi-valued attribute. So multi-valued attribute means it can have more than one value. So it is represented by a double oval. Okay, so for example, a phone number of a person can be considered as a multi-valued attribute because a person can have more than one phone number. Next is derived attribute. Okay, so derived attribute, it is represented by a dashed oval. Okay, so A's can be example of a derived attribute. What is a derived attribute? Derived attribute means that in which whose value is dynamic, it is changing, and that can be derived from another attribute. So the age of a person, it changes year to year, and this can be derived from date of birth attribute. So this is called a derived attribute. Okay, next one is composite attribute. Okay, so what is a composite attribute? So a composite attribute, it is composed of a number of elements, we can say. Okay, so this is the example of a composite attribute. This. Okay, for example, if we say the address of a person, so the address is composed of street number, street number. What other things it can contain? We can say pin number, yeah, we can say the country. So composite attribute means this attribute is a combination of a number of attributes. Next is the key attribute. Key attribute. Okay, so a key attribute, it is used to identify a entity uniquely. Key attribute, it uniquely identify an entity. For example, if you take a student entity, so in this student entity, a ID is used to identify it uniquely. Okay, now after discussing, let me see any other. Okay, so this unique, or you can say this key attribute, it is represented by a oval and inside this a dash. Now let's go to the next symbol. So the next symbol is representation of a weak entity. Weak entity. So a weak entity is represented by a double, we can say a double rectangle. So what is a weak entity? So entity can be of two types: strong entity and weak entity. So weak entity, it is any entity which depend on other entity for its existence. For example, if we say a bank, if we take example of a bank account, or we can say a bank account example, if we take example of a bank database, so we can say that if we have a got account, okay, if you have got an account and if you have a dependent in that, if you have got a dependent, or we can say let's take example of simple bank account example, bank DBMS. Let's not make it so confusing. So if we say this is a bank entity and we can say this is a bank account, so here this is the weak entity, this is the strong entity. So a bank account cannot be uniquely identified without knowing the bank to which it belong. Okay, so if this bank entity does not exist, this bank account will also not exist, because if you don't know the name of the bank, we will never know the bank account. Okay, so in this case, this is dependent on this another entity, so this entity is known as a strong entity, and the entity which depends on the other is known as the weak entity. Okay, fine. So these are the symbols of the attributes. So in next video I'll be covering about the, okay, so let's draw, first of all let's draw a complete diagram of all these attributes. So for example, if we have a let's say if we have a student, so this is an entity, and we can say a college, so this is an entity, and a student study in college, so this is a entity, this is a relation. Okay, and we can say a student, but there is one attribute known as ID, so this is a key attribute. We can say the name, it is a simple attribute, we can say, or we can say this can be a composite attribute, because this name can consist of first name and last name. The age of the student, it can be a derived attribute. The phone number of a student, it can be a multi-valued attribute. Okay, So this is example of a simplest diagram we can see. So in next video I'll be covering the relationship, the types of relationship, the cardinality, and the participation. So in this relationship I'll be talking about the weak relation, and the participation part, and after this we can draw a complete and detailed diagram for various DBMS. Okay, till then stay safe and thank you.